Hi friends, we have 27 legends in the Apex games, but what is the story behind why each legend really joined the games? Well, we're going to find out together in this video as we go back through the lore to find the truth. And let's start with our original legends. Wraith was a senior science pilot called Renee Blasey. We know she was experimented on with phase technology and eventually ended up swapping places with the Wraith from our dimension. The Wraith we have today arrived on King's Canyon while it was still under construction for the Apex games. Unfortunately for her though, she was missing much of her memories, so she didn't really know who she was or what happened to her. She didn't even know her own name at the time. So Wraith joined the games to uncover her true identity and find out more about the experiments that happened to her. And there was also an inclination from Wraith that the other legends might be able to help uncover who she is. And since the start of the games, we have actually seen that happen, Mirage being one such example. His mother had files on Wraith that he was able to share with Wraith to help her learn more about herself. So that's the reason Wraith joined the Apex games, to learn who she really is. Let's look at Bangalore next. A former IMC soldier, she ended up in the Outlands after she got injured and her brother decided to flee the battle on the IMC Hestia. Unfortunately, the IMC Hestia, as it jumped through space, would end up crash landing on Storm Point on the planet Gaia. Sometime later, they got a second ship, which they named appropriately the Hestia 2. But there was an incident where her brother Jackson ended up falling out of the ship after its hull was breached. Now many assumed Jackson had died, but Bangalore is confident he's still alive, at least she was at the time. To go with that, Bangalore is originally from a planet called Gridiron in the Frontier. The reason she never travelled back there though is because it's a decades-long trip, and therefore Bangalore joined the Apex games to earn enough money and contacts to find her brother and or find a way to get back to Gridiron. And you'll hear more about Jackson a little bit later. For now though, let's continue with the OG legends. Bloodhound's reason for joining the Apex games is more of a noble reason. You see, Bloodhound is in the games not for themselves, but for Boone. Now Boone was a mysterious hunter that lost his life to a beast he hunted with Bloodhound. They captured the beast together, but in the end, Boone died in a dishonourable way, and in Bloodhound's culture, this means Boone won't make it into the afterlife in Valhalla. Therefore, Bloodhound joins the Apex games to achieve enough victories to offer to the Allfather so Boone can make it to Valhalla. Sticking with the OG legends, Pathfinder has had many purposes in his life, but his most important was saving the Outlands. However, after saving the Outlands with his creators, the group, Pathfinder lost his memories. He couldn't remember who his creators were, and unfortunately for him they all perished a long time ago. But the fact he didn't remember or know that started his quest to find his original creators. This will lead him to work in many different jobs and helping many different people, one of those being Victor Maldera, who would eventually become his friend and inspire Pathfinder to become a fan of boxing. One day, after bumping into Elliot Witt in a bar on Solace, Pathfinder learned about the Apex games, and he would go on to join the Apex games because Elliot Witt told him all about it, and he thought he could use the publicity to find his creators. Something we know eventually he would be successful in, because Pathfinder was able to discover and understand about the group who are the ones that created Pathfinder. And it also turns out, according to Cuban Blisk, Pathfinder has a sort of son, and this now keeps him in the Apex games for a second reason, to find his son. Moving on to Gibraltar. Gibraltar's from a family that really cares about people. Many of Gibraltar's friends took part in the Civil War, and that meant a lot of them didn't return. After Gibraltar caused an accident which led to his father losing his hand and his boyfriend at the time taking the blame and going to jail, Gibraltar decided he wanted to instead help and protect his friends. And therefore, he joined the Apex games, not necessarily in search of fame or money, but to help people and protect his friends. Mirage heard about the Apex games while working as a bartender in Solace City. He always dreamed about being in the Apex games, and after hearing about the fame and wealth it brought, he really wanted to join. But he also didn't want to leave his mother childless, because he lost his brothers in the war, and they went MIA, never to be seen from again. It turns out though, his mother wanted him to pursue his passions, and one day she gave him a set of custom hollow devices and told him to follow his dream. Caustic is a sadistic scientist, but one thing you might not know is that he has cancer and he doesn't expect to live very long. After being expelled from Humbert Labs and causing a fire that killed Franklin Humbert, Caustic decided to join the Apex Games so he could use the contestant as his lab rats for his experiments, but also hoping to one day find a cure. Lifeline joined the Apex Games with a simple mission: to fund the Frontier Corps with her winnings. You see, Lifeline is a former rich kid whose parents were big war profiteers, but Lifeline rejected that destiny and she devoted her life to humanitarian causes with the Frontier Corps, and therefore she joined the Apex Games to give her the platform to do that. One of Lifeline's childhood friends, Octane, as you know, is also in the Apex Games, and he was a rich kid just like Lifeline. His reason for joining the games isn't quite as noble as Lifeline's. Octane's an adrenaline junkie, and he constantly does crazy stunts for the rush. And after blowing off his own legs to try and beat a speed record, and then getting a set of robotic legs, courtesy of his friend Lifeline, he decided to join the Apex Games to find his next challenge. And it turns out, the Apex Games is just the adrenaline rush he was looking for. One of our younger contestants in the Apex Games is Natalie Paquette, also known as Wattson. She's a child of the Apex Games, in fact. Her father was the one that created much of the technology we have in the games today. And it wasn't just her father. Wattson herself made a big contribution in creating the closing ring technology. And the key reason Wattson wanted to join the Apex Games was because sadly, her father died before the closing ring technology was revealed in the Apex Games. And that meant she was left alone at a very young age, because her mother had also died when she was younger. Fortunately for Wattson though, the contestants in the game were very close to her, and they essentially became her new family as they took her in and gave her advice and cared for her. And therefore she joined the Apex Games to be close to her new family, without which she would be all alone. Crypto, secretly Tajan Park, was framed for a crime he didn't commit. He was forced to flee from the syndicate after armed forces approached his apartment because he had been framed for killing his sister, who as it happened wasn't actually killed, she was just abducted, but that didn't stop the syndicate hunting him down. Therefore Tajan had to shed his identity and become Crypto. As Crypto, an expert hacker, he was able to hack his way, with a bit of a distraction, into the Apex Games. The reason he had to do that was because he didn't believe he was good enough to actually qualify for the Apex Games through skill. However, either way, it worked and he was able to get himself into the Apex Games, and his reason or intention behind joining the Apex Games is quite simple. He wants to infiltrate the syndicate and find out who was behind framing him, but also find a way to clear his name and search for his sister at the same time. Now obviously through the Apex Games, he would realise his sister wasn't dead and realise she was alive, and while we've seen them communicate virtually, we've not seen them reunited in person just yet. Revenant, aka former human Caleb Cross, has the thirst for killing. Now for a time, his programming made him believe he was human. That is until one day a glass shard caused a malfunction and he remembered everything, as the ego retention system that was put in place to ensure mental stability was gone. And this left a very unstable and slightly angry killing machine. After killing Forge, who had initially qualified for the Apex Games, Hammond, the Syndicate, and everyone controlling the Apex Games decided the only place Revenant could satisfy his thirst for killing, and therefore protect anyone else who Revenant might have targeted, i.e. people in the Syndicate or in Hammond Robotics, they decided to put Revenant in the games. Now one person that ties in closely with Revenant is Loba. We know she loves stealing treasures and she's very good at it, and that's something she inherits from her parents, who are very renowned thieves. The real reason Loba joined the Apex Games though is revenge. You see, Revenant killed Loba's parents when she was just a child, and while she'd be good at stealing things and one day find a close friend with a blue-haired boy called Jamie, revenge was still her life's mission. As soon as she realised Revenant was in the Apex Games, it kind of gave her a reason to join the Apex Games herself. However, there's a bit more to her reasoning for joining the Apex Games. One of those is an attempted assassination on Revenant's source code, which at the time was being held under King's Canyon, but that didn't go to plan and essentially ended up with Loba blowing up Skulltown. To go with that, the Syndicate also needed a special treasure retrieving, which turned out to be Asher's head. Effectively though, it kind of meant Loba didn't have much of a choice but to make a deal with the Syndicate and join the Apex Games. Rampart is an expert modder, and she was owner of a legendary modding shop on the planet Gaia. Sadly for Rampart though, Big Sister ended up burning that shop down, and Rampart lost everything. A lucky turn for her though, Cuban Blisk turned up with an offer for Rampart to join the Apex Games, and with it, it gave her a second chance. Horizon has but one goal: to keep her promise and get back to see her son. You see, during a trip to space, Horizon was betrayed by her assistant, and that left her orbiting in space. And while she was able to return to Olympus 87 years later, her son was gone. Upon returning though, she saw the Apex Games as a way to build the resources and connections she needed for her research to enable to get her back to see her son. Of course, we've seen a bit more progress on that more recently thanks to the arrival of Alter, Fuse of the planet Salvo. He was a champion of the Salvonian fighting scene, but he always craved a larger stage. When Salvo joined the Syndicate group of planets, Fuse was presented with the opportunity to become the first Salvonian participant in the Apex Games, and of course he jumped at that opportunity because it's the biggest stage of them all. Valkyrie, a pilot somewhat living in the shadow of her father, the famous apex predator Viper. Her goal was to be the best and finally live up to the symbol that is Viper. However, she also blames Cuban Blisk for killing her father, and after an intense confrontation with him, Blisk presented her with an opportunity to join the Apex Games and fulfill her destiny to become as great as her father was, or maybe even better. It's an opportunity she can't refuse, because she sees that as a chance to make her father proud and create her legacy. Seer, the mysterious artist of the underground arenas. After converting the crowds and becoming the people's champion in the arenas of Boreas, Seer decided to join the Apex Games to take his legacy further. One of the key reasons he wants to do this is so he can shed the bad omen that surrounds him. Ashe joined the games in Season 11, and like Revenant, she's also a simulacrum. And while she was discarded, Pathfinder would later find her in a bin and bring her back to life. She wasn't quite herself though, until Horizon did something to trigger them, by uttering a few secret codes. Unfortunately, this would restore Ashe's slightly darker personality, as opposed to the good side of her, which is often referred to as Lee versus Ashe. Now, given Ashe's badder side has come through, this version of Ashe joined the Apex Games so she could transcend all humanity, and also with the hopes of shutting out the good Lee side of her persona. After Ashe came Mad Maggie. She was the childhood friend of Fuse, but after an altercation with Fuse that saw her blow his arm off, she would then go on to try to sabotage Fuse's introduction to the Apex Games. And following that, she would go on to incite various rebellions against the Syndicate. You see, her goal was to keep Salvo free, and she didn't believe in that Syndicate treaty that brought the planets together. Eventually, this would lead to her being arrested by the Syndicate though, and in a court hearing, she is charged with 27 counts of sedation, including 18 counts of inciting riots, and 9 counts of raiding transport ships. This led to her facing a firing squad, but Eduardo Silva saw a different use for her, and with one single signal, he was able to use his influence to sentence her to serving in the Apex Games. Newcastle joined in Season 13, and there's one thing you need to know. Current Newcastle isn't the original Newcastle. You see, Renee was the name of the original Newcastle, but he wasn't good enough to get into the Apex Games. The reason he needed the Apex Games was because he was in debt to the Forgotten Families, and he needed the fame and fortune from the games to pay them off. One day, Lamont Craig sees the Forgotten Families kill the original Newcastle, and while he attempts to intervene, he actually ends up making a deal for him to assume the mantle of Newcastle. Lamont Craig, aka Newcastle, joins the Apex Games to protect his family and Harris Valley. There is also a side reason as well, perhaps a secret motivation for Lamont Craig willing to join the Apex Games, and that is, he's secretly Jackson Williams, aka Bangalore's brother. So, by joining the Apex Games, he not only stands up for his family and Harris Valley, but there's also a chance to reconnect with his sister. Vantage also has a family-related reason for joining the Apex Games. She grew up on the planet Pagos with her mother. They lived pretty much in solitude because her mother was a fugitive, but one day Vantage was badly injured, and that left her mother no option but to trigger a beacon. And that beacon led to her mother being imprisoned because she was a fugitive on the run. And upon visiting her in prison, Vantage discovered the Apex Games, and she realised this was a platform she could use to rally support for her mother. Catalyst came after Vantage, and she has quite an interesting reason. It's not about family, but it is about protecting something. You see, Catalyst grew up on the planet Boreas. Her and her friends were strong believers in the power of the moon, which they called Cleo. Unfortunately, Cleo took damage from a collision some time ago, and this was starting to cause it to disintegrate, which in turn threatened the stability of the planet Boreas and therefore putting its people in danger. Catalyst joined a terraforming crew to help rejuvenate the moon Cleo, but the Apex games would later arrive on the moon thanks to Seer, and they would essentially take over the area. This meant all the terraforming crews were let go, which were a lot of Catalyst's friends, plus the Syndicate would turn the moon into an arena for the Apex games, and this kind of left Catalyst with no choice. If she wanted to stay on the place she loved and try to protect and support her friends and family, she would have to join the Apex games, and that's exactly why she does it. And now we go back to the family theme with Ballistic. He was originally a Thunderdome's game contestant, but when his best friend died, because of his own vanity nonetheless, he fell into a great depression that saw his wife and son walk out. Now his son would grow up to be good enough to qualify for the Apex games, but when Ballistic saw that, he feared his son would suffer the same fate as his best friend. So Ballistic used his relationship with Eduardo Silva, along with a little bit of a threat, to replace his son in the Apex games, and in doing so, protecting him from the dangers of the games themselves. Conduit's goal of joining the games is all about family as well. However, while Ballistic's decision was all about family, but none about money, because he was already filthy rich, Conduit's reasoning for joining the games is actually all about the money, so she can support her family. You see, she grew up being supported by her family, and in particular her older sister, but one day her older sister returned with an injury, and it meant she couldn't support her family. So Conduit decided it was time for her to step up. So she's effectively sacrificing herself to provide for her family. A very noble reason, in fact, for joining the Apex games. Following Conduit, we had Alter arrive in the games. Now, she's perhaps the most mysterious legend we've had so far, and she's one that has very hidden true intentions of why she's joining the Apex games. One thing is clear though, Horizon's definitely part of the reason. You see, Alter has been to many different dimensions, and she's seen many dimensions fall. She's noticed there's always been one commonality across the destruction of all of those dimensions, and that has some tie-in with Horizon. Now, while we haven't quite got to the truth behind that yet, it's pretty clear that Horizon is one of the key motivations for Alter joining the Apex games, and it has something to do with her thinking our version of Dr. Mary Summers, aka Horizon, in this universe is very different to the others. And finally, we get the most recent legend that we've had to the games, and that is Sparrow. You might have guessed, his reason for joining the Apex games is also family related. You see, Sparrow was part of the famous hunting clan, the Classidra Rossa. Unfortunately for Sparrow though, he didn't always agree with the beliefs of the Classidra Rossa, and this kind of led to him being a little bit reckless, and that recklessness is what caused him to be shunned by his family. And while he was solo bounty hunting on his own, an unexpected bystander recruited him to the Apex games. And Sparrow saw this as an opportunity to show off his skills, but also with a deeper aim to earn enough success to find a way to win back the acceptance of his family. So clearly there's a family motivator there for Sparrow. And there you have it. That covers all of the legends we've got so far up to Season 26 in the Apex games. I hope now you have a slightly better understanding of why each legend is even in the games to start with, at least from a lore story perspective. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you later.